Have you ever sat quietly and wondered when everything started to change between you and your children? Not in a dramatic, angry way, just slowly. One visit turned into fewer. Phone calls became shorter. The conversations that used to flow so naturally started to feel forced or one-sided. You catch yourself talking more than listening, just to fill the silence. Or maybe you don't talk much at all anymore, afraid of saying the wrong thing, of being too much, of reminding them that you're still here. There's no one moment you can point to, no big argument, no clear decision, just the quiet shift of presence into absence. And that absence doesn't always feel loud, it feels heavy, like walking into a room full of people and still feeling invisible, like watching your own family build a life without you in it. Some days you try to brush it off, they're busy, they've got their own lives. You tell yourself that you don't want to be a burden. You've probably said that out loud more than once. Don't worry about me, I'm fine even when you weren't, especially when you weren't. But deep down it still stings, doesn't it? To give so much of your heart, your time, your years, only to feel like a background character in the story you helped write. You raised them, sacrificed for them, held their hands through every storm, and now it feels like you're watching their life through a window waving from the other side while they forget to look back. It's not bitterness that fills your chest, it's grief. Grief for a kind of closeness that's faded, grief for the ease of connection, for the comfort of being needed, even just a little. And yes, grief for the simple joy of mattering. There's a woman I know, let's call her Elaine, in her early 70s now, elegant, bright, thoughtful. She used to host Sunday dinners every single week for her 3 grown children and all the grandkids. She spent hours planning meals, setting the table, buying little things she knew each person liked. It was her rhythm of love, her anchor. Then slowly one family stopped coming as often, then another. The last started arriving late and leaving early, always with apologies. The kids have soccer, we're exhausted, next weekend maybe. Now it's just her, 1 roast chicken, a table for 12, and quiet. She never said anything, never complained. Instead, she smiled too brightly and offered leftovers they didn't really want. When I asked her once why she kept doing it, she said, "Because if I stop, then it's really over." And maybe that's what we're all a little afraid of. That if we stop trying, stop offering, stop accommodating, stop tiptoeing around their lives, we'll have to face the truth that we're not needed in the way we used to be. And we think that not being needed means not being important. But here's something no one tells you when you get older. Your mind, your sharpness, your soul. They don't fade just because someone forgets to ask about them. They fade when you forget to see them. Staying mentally sharp doesn't start with puzzles or brain games or reading a book every week, though those are wonderful. It starts with remembering who you are beyond the role you played for others. It starts with reclaiming your place, not at their table, but in your own life. You don't have to be the forgotten parent sitting quietly at the edge of a room. You are still full of stories, of wisdom, of laughter, of ideas. But when the world around you stops inviting those things out of you, it's easy to let them settle like dust on a shelf. So what if you stopped waiting for their call to feel whole? What if your mental sharpness, your sense of self, wasn't tied to how often you're included in someone else's life? I know a man, Frank. He used to be the kind of dad everyone leaned on, fixing things, driving grandkids to school, managing bills, helping with decisions. After retirement, he looked forward to finally having time to enjoy life with his children, but they didn't quite show up the way he imagined. They were busy, yes, but there was something else too, a quiet shifting of the dynamic. They saw him as someone who had been strong. Now they mostly asked him how he was feeling, if he needed anything. They meant well, but it stung. He told me they talked to me like I'm a step away from disappearing. One day after another dinner where no one really asked him about his life, Frank went home, opened the piano he hadn't touched in years, and started playing again. Badly at first, but something happened. The music opened a door inside him. He'd closed quietly without realizing. Not long after, he started writing short stories just for himself, then for a local group, Now he reads them aloud at the senior center twice a month, not for attention, not for validation, just because they're his words, his voice, his place. The human mind doesn't go dull because of age. It goes dull from silence, from disuse, from being looked through instead of looked at. And when family starts to step back, it's easy to let your mind follow them out the door. But what if, instead, you started turning inward, not in isolation, but in exploration? What if you treated your thoughts like guests worth listening to again? What if you gave yourself the gift of being curious about your own story? You are not finished. You are not fading. You are not optional. You may not be the center of their world anymore, but you are still the heart of your own. And that heart deserves to be seen, to be sharpened, to be held in the dignity of your own attention. Because when you remember how full you still are inside the absence of others, feels less like a rejection and more like an invitation to rediscover the company of yourself. And in that quiet rediscovery, something begins to awaken. There's a strange kind of peace that starts to form when you stop straining to be seen by others and instead turn your gaze inward with kindness, not judgment. And often what you find there is not emptiness, but someone quietly waiting, someone who's been holding the weight of years, the disappointments, the small betrayals of love that didn't show up quite the way you hoped. That someone is you. Many of us, without even realizing it, fall into patterns meant to keep us included, especially in our children's lives. We become overly agreeable, quick to say yes, even when our body says no. We laugh off hurtful comments. We offer time, money, favors, anything, hoping it might restore the bond. We start playing a role we never auditioned for the endlessly available, quietly invisible elder. But this isn't who we truly are. It's who we become when we believe that love must be earned again and again, that we are only valuable if we are useful, that if we set a boundary, we risk being left behind completely. Let me tell you about Margaret. She was always the nice one. In her words, she didn't like conflict, never raised her voice, and always said yes when her daughter asked for help watching the grandkids on short notice, loaning money she didn't really have, changing her plans to accommodate theirs. She thought this was love, that being flexible meant being loved back. But slowly, she began to feel hollow. She noticed that her daughter stopped saying thank you, that visits became demands, that when Margaret finally tried to express her exhaustion, she was met with, "Why are you being so dramatic?" That's when something inside her cracked, not in anger, but in realization. She told me, "I thought being a good mother meant giving everything. But now I see it means respecting myself enough to say when enough is enough." It wasn't easy. The first time she said no, her voice trembled. Her daughter didn't take it well. But Margaret stayed calm. She didn't yell, didn't explain herself endlessly. She just stood her ground. And over time, something surprising happened, not just outside of her, but within. She began reading again, walking every morning, joining a book circle at the library. She stopped waiting for someone else to invite her to matter. She did it herself, and her daughter. Eventually, she noticed. She didn't say much at first, but the tone shifted. The conversations grew a little more respectful, the calls less transactional, not because Margaret demanded it, but because Margaret stopped chasing it. There's a quiet power in refusing to shrink yourself in order to fit into someone else's comfort zone, especially when that someone is your own family. But that power doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from clarity. So many of us confuse love with sacrifice. We learned perhaps from our own parents or from the culture around us that being needed is the same as being loved, that if we just do enough, say the right thing, keep the peace, we'll be invited back into the warmth. But here's the truth. No one tells you as you grow older, peace that costs your voice is not peace. It's silence. And silence is not connection. You don't need to shout. You don't need to fight. But you do need to honor the small voice inside you that says, this doesn't feel right. That voice, that's not weakness. That's your wisdom. and your wisdom deserves room to breathe. Frank once told me I spent so many years trying to stay relevant to my kids. Then I realized I never became irrelevant. I just stopped showing them who I really was. That struck me deeply, because so many seniors still carry this quiet, brilliance, ideas, humor, perspective, memory. But when no one asks, we stop offering. When no one listens, we stop speaking. And when we stop, the mind begins to close in on itself. But here's where the shift begins, not in demanding to be heard, but in choosing to speak with presence. In making eye contact with yourself again in the mirror and saying, I still matter. In treating your time, your energy, your attention as sacred, not disposable. You'd be surprised how magnetic, calm self-respect can be. We think of boundaries as walls, but really they're doors. They invite others to enter your space with respect or not at all. And once you create that kind of space within yourself, your mind begins to sharpen in ways that surprise you. Not because of a crossword puzzle, not because of memory tricks, but because you're living from the inside out again, not outside in. Helen, a retired teacher, told me something I'll never forget. She said, when I stopped asking to be included and started creating a life that included myself, I felt smarter, clearer, more alive. She didn't mean it in some grand, flashy way. She meant she could follow a thought again, finish a book, remember what she wanted to say without second-guessing it. Because the fog that clouds the mind often begins with the pain of exclusion. But clarity returns when we reclaim the right to exist fully whether or not others notice. And yes, that takes courage. The kind of courage that whispers, I am enough even on the loneliest days. The kind that says, I choose presence over performance. The kind that doesn't wait for the phone to ring to feel whole. You are not here to fade politely. You are here to be fully gloriously present with or without applause. And when you begin to believe that again the sharpness of your mind becomes a quiet, steady flame, not desperate, not loud, just steady. You don't have to prove anything anymore. You don't have to explain why you deserve respect. You only have to begin by giving it to yourself. And in that simple act, everything starts to change. When you begin to live from that place of steady self-respect, something subtle but unmistakable happens. The world starts responding to you differently. Not because you demanded it, not because you lectured or chased anyone down, but because the air around you has changed. The way you hold yourself quietly, clearly, unapologetically begins to speak louder than words ever could. Elaine, who used to cook those Sunday dinners no one came to anymore, made a quiet decision one spring afternoon. She looked at her long dining table, the one that used to be full of voices and laughter, and she covered it with a fresh cloth, not for guests, but for herself. She sat down with a pot of tea and a puzzle she'd been saving. She turned on the radio. She stopped checking the clock to see if anyone was coming. And then she did something that surprised even her. She called a neighbor she used to chat with in passing and invited her over for a light lunch the next week. That one lunch became 2, then 3. They started sharing recipes, garden tips, even stories about their grown children that used to feel too tender to say out loud. No, her children didn't suddenly reappear every Sunday. But when they did come around, they noticed something different. Elaine was less eager to fix things, less quick to downplay her feelings. She didn't complain, but she also didn't bend over backwards anymore. She smiled the same, but the smile was anchored now, not searching. One of her daughters, while helping her clear dishes one evening, paused and said, "You seem different lately." Lighter. Elaine just nodded. She didn't need to explain. That's the thing about emotional restoration. It doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from realignment, from living in a way that honors your own breath, your own needs, your own mind. Margaret, who had always said yes out of fear of being left out, started choosing her yeses more carefully. She said no to babysitting when she was tired. She said yes to coffee dates with friends. She started journaling every morning, something she hadn't done since her 20s. And in doing so, she found her memory improving, not because she was trying to sharpen it, but because she was using it again, calling on it, trusting it. Her mind, long flattened by self-neglect, began to stretch and awaken, like a flower turning toward light. The most profound part: she didn't feel guilty anymore. That's the difference between living for approval and living in truth. Approval is fleeting. Truth is grounding. When you stop asking, will this make them like me, and start asking, is this honest for me, you come back to life. And life, for all its shifts and changes, still belongs to you. You can feel it in the way you walk into a room, not apologizing for taking up space, but filling it with your quiet dignity. You notice your mind engaging again, not to prove yourself to anyone, but because you're finally listening to yourself. That spark, that clarity was never gone. It was just buried under years of trying to stay small so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But you're not small. You've lived through too much to be small. You've held families together, carried grief silently, laughed in the face of fear, loved people who didn't always love you back the way you needed. That kind of resilience doesn't disappear. It transforms. Frank, with his piano and his stories, eventually found himself surrounded by new people, fellow seniors, some younger folks who came to hear him read. His adult children started asking about his writing. Not often, not always thoughtfully, but they asked because they sensed something had shifted. Their father was no longer waiting for their attention like a man starving. He was full, engaged, whole. And people are drawn to wholeness not in a needy way, but in an admiring one. That's the power of quiet presence. When you stop needing the world to validate your worth, the world starts to feel your worth again. You don't have to go skydiving or take up chess to prove you're still sharp. You only need to live with curiosity again. Ask questions, try new things, speak your thoughts, even if they shake a little. Laugh more, not to entertain, but because joy has returned to your body like an old friend. Mental sharpness isn't a measure of how many facts you remember. It's the freedom to think your own thoughts again, to feel engaged in your own life, to notice the wind and not be numb to it. So many people over 60 are told to slow down, to take it easy, to step back. But maybe what you really need is to lean into yourself. Have that conversation you've been holding back. Take that class you always said was for someone else. Plant something. Learn something. Ask someone younger what they're excited about and tell them what you are too. You don't need to chase youth to feel alive. You need to claim your presence. Let go of the guilt for wanting more. Let go of the lie that you're only as important as others make you feel. Let go of the story that says your sharpness fades because your family doesn't see you anymore. You are not a reflection in their mirror. You are your own light. And that light, yes, that quiet, steady light, has the power to illuminate not just your own path, but the lives of those around you, not by chasing them down, but by standing in your radiance. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. And when you do, your mind responds. Your body responds. The world in its own time begins to respond, not always as you hoped, but differently, respectfully, sometimes even with awe. Because nothing is more powerful than someone who remembers their worth and wears it like a quiet crown. If you're still here with me, still listening, thank you. That alone tells me something about you. It tells me your heart is still open. Your spirit is still reaching for something real. And that, in itself, is a beautiful form of strength. You didn't have to stay. You didn't have to take in these words, but you did. And maybe that's because somewhere inside you, something is stirring again, a part of you that remembers how it feels to be alive in your own skin, to be grounded in your own mind, to be rooted in your own worth. I want you to know, you are not alone in this. There are so many others, mothers, fathers, grandparents, who have felt the same ache in their chest, sitting quietly in the living room after a missed visit, wondering if they did something wrong. People who have smiled through the ache of being passed over, left out, or talked down to by the very people they once cradled and carried and cheered for. If that's been you, if it's still you, please hear this. Now, your value has not changed just because someone's attention did. You do not disappear just because they stop looking. You are still here. You are still whole. You are still worthy of being known. And if you've ever questioned that, if you've ever sat in your own kitchen and whispered to yourself, "Does anyone still see me?" I want you to know that yes, someone does. I see you. And more importantly, you can learn to see yourself again. Not as someone begging for a place at the table, but as someone who has already built the table with love and care and resilience. Someone who has the right to sit there in peace and presence, whether or not anyone else joins you. That's the quiet revolution of this stage in life. You're not here to perform anymore. You're here to be, to breathe, to wonder, to explore, to speak, to create, to love yourself with the same devotion you once gave so freely to everyone else. So I want to ask you something. Has your relationship with your adult children changed over time? And if so, how have you changed through it? What have you learned to let go of? What have you learned to reclaim? If you feel comfortable, I would be honored if you shared your story in the comments. Because when one person speaks up, it gives quiet permission for others to say me too. And there's so much power in that. And if this message made you feel even a little bit more seen, a little more hopeful, I'd love for us to stay connected. This space is here for you. So click subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll keep walking this path together. Slowly, gently, but surely. Because this journey isn't over. Not for you, not for me, not for any of us who still wake up each day wondering what's next. And maybe, just maybe, what's next isn't something you chase. Maybe it's something you stand still long enough to welcome. You are still growing. You are still unfolding. And your mind, your beautiful, powerful mind, it's still yours. Still vibrant, still hungry for meaning, for truth, for connection. So let's keep tending to it. Not out of fear of decline, but out of love for life. Let's keep showing up for ourselves, not because others forgot to, but because we remembered how. And if no one told you today, you are doing just fine. Better than fine. You are here. And that, my friend, is more than enough. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You deserve that more than anyone.